Hey everyone, welcome to the Kratom Sobriety Podcast. This is Chris. And this week we have a special guest. I think we should just kind of jump right into it. Our guest this week, his name is Sean. Sean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sean, and I am Christine's ex-husband.
Yes, Sean is my ex-husband. And I thought that this might be an interesting conversation to have because Sean and I started using Kratom together. We kind of discovered it together. Obviously, I spiraled into a pretty severe addiction to Kratom and later to the kava Kratom extract shots. Sean did not, but Sean has used Kratom and he has also used the kava Kratom extract shots. And he saw the whole progression of my addiction. So I thought it would be interesting to bring Sean in this week and have a conversation with him, just so we could hear the perspective of someone who has seen from the outside the effect that Kratom had on someone. So yeah, let's just jump right into the conversation. Sean, besides my ex-husband, how would you describe yourself or how would you introduce yourself?
Just like as a person?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I am a father, former English teacher. I resigned teaching right after Christine and I split up and kind of leapfrogged into a career that I would have never expected I was in. So I'm currently in software development. So as Christine touched upon, I do have some experience with Kratom.
You can pronounce it however you want.
I've heard it be called Kratom too.
Yeah, everyone will know.
Yeah. I've had experience with it and with the Kratom kava shots as well, like she had said. So it's an interesting dynamic, especially, being somebody who is an outsider who bore witness to the destruction it can cause and also the positivity that can come out of fighting back and changing your life.
Yeah. So I should give a little backstory for all of those who are interested. Sean and I were married for 11 years, right? 10 years. And we obviously have a very good relationship now. We're good friends. We co-parent very well.
Agreed.
But the last few years were absolutely difficult.
Oh, yeah.
In large part, I mean, obviously there were other issues, but in large part because of my addiction. So maybe we can take it all the way back, Sean, to the very beginning.
Yep.
How did Kratom enter our lives? We were married.
Yeah, we were married. I think that the downfall had already begun. Having the clean slate and coming out of it and kind of debriefing from the death of a marriage, you start to, at least in retrospect, really begin to think about who you are as a person, but also how your dynamic was with the other person. I think we would have been really good friends. And I don't think we necessarily should have been married. And I think that I'm glad we were. I think we had a lot of really good times. But I think that...
And we made our son. We won't say his name on air, but we made our son.
That is the most important thing because he's an amazing individual.
He's the most incredible person in the world.
Yep.
I feel bad for all of you listening that you don't know him.
You don't get to know. But yeah, I think really the death knell began because of COVID. You're pent up, you're isolated from society, and you're stuck in a house with a partner that you naturally already had problems with. So it tends to just naturally exacerbate those problems. And I think that on top of anxiety and ever mounting pressures, I think that's what drove both of us to look at Kratom. From the onset, it was a seemingly innocuous substance. I think that also lends an insidiousness to it because, it's pretty much pervaded the market and goes seemingly unregulated. The first time I found it, I was actually at one of those Delta 8 stores, and they had some sort of thing. It was just a 5 or 8 pack. I'm not sure. I was naturally reticent just because I have OCD and I tend to ruminate on everything. But I picked them up anyway. There was a guy there that already had them, and he said they make you feel really good and relaxed, etc. So I picked it up, and I don't think I even tried those. And I think you tried them, but they were just funk.
Yeah, I remember you brought them home. I forget if they were capsules or what.
You tried like one.
And I tried like one and it didn't do anything. And I was like, these are ridiculous. And I think that almost made them more dangerous because I tried it and I didn't feel anything. So I was like, oh, these are harmless. And like, they can't do anything.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was COVID. I mean, we were bored and I forget how it escalated from there. But
well, naturally, like with anything that I do, I do my due diligence. I researched it a little bit. Reddit pointed me towards, you know, I learned about it. I learned about the different strains and I learned about what each of them do. And
did you see anything when you were researching it about it being addictive?
Probably not, because I did eventually, but I think that the subreddits that I was on were not geared towards quitting kratom.
Right.
Rather, they were geared towards,
oh, this is so fun.
Yeah.
This can make you feel really
exactly.
good.
Yeah. And like talking about the strains and like people trying them and what they do. And so that led me to finding like reputable brands, which then led me to search for stores around where we lived that sold reputable brands. And that's another thing that deepens the insidiousness, because you have these reputable brands, but you also have people that will just copycat their branding and still sell them because, like I'd said, they're federally, they're unregulated. So I remember going in and buying some of these and being like, can I see the package to make sure that they have the QR code, or to make sure the batch dates align or they're on the right place. I think that's what led us to actually trying kratom in that way. I found a smoke shop around where we lived that had a good rating, and Google ratings specifically talked about kratom. So I went there and I purchased the strain that I can't even remember which one it was.
So we were using it together at first, and pretty much using the same amounts at first.
Yes. And it was, you know, it was definitely like a blow off steam.
Recreational.
Yeah. But also I think for you, there was definitely an anxiety component to it.
Yeah. I mean, that was part of the problem for sure. I mean, I said I was using it to blow off steam, but then it made me feel good. And at the time I was definitely self-medicating. I mean, at the time I was talking to you about maybe getting on, you know, an antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication, but it, you know, that stuff takes a couple months to get in your system and see if it's working. And unfortunately, I wanted something that worked pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it did.
Yep.
So you and I started using it together, same doses recreationally, like on the weekend. But then I saw that it made me feel good. And I think I started hiding it a little bit from you. Do you remember that at all?
Yeah. I remember it really didn't become apparent to me until we started talking about it. I think that there were so many problems during that time in our marriage that shit just kind of fell by the wayside.
Yeah, I would like to say that kratom was not the reason our marriage failed.
No.
The kratom really took a toll on our relationship after we were divorced.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think I don't even purport that the kratom had any sort of bearing on our on the ending of our marriage. I don't think it had anything to do with it.
Do you remember me coming to you? Because I remember this very clearly, coming to you and saying, I did not realize this stuff was addictive. I think I'm addicted to it, and I'm going to need you to bear the brunt of parenting for like a weekend so I can get off of this stuff.
Yeah, I remember exactly, because I took our son to a tiny little amusement park because you were just laying in bed and you were like, my legs are going crazy. I need to detox off of this shit. And
I was shocked. I was shocked because I hadn't used it for like maybe 24 hours and I felt very uncomfortable. We'd only been using it maybe for a few months at that point, and that's when I looked it up online. I think I typed, is kratom addictive? And then just a ton of stuff came up and I was like, oh my God, I'm addicted to this stuff and I'm going to have to withdraw. Yeah. That was a very scary moment for me. But unfortunately, I was addicted to it already. And I didn't, even though I physically got off of it, I don't think I realized what a hold it had on me emotionally and just everything else.
I mean, it's just like weed. I mean, they say weed's not physiologically addictive, but it's definitely psychologically addictive. And I think that kratom is both physiological and psychologically addictive.
Yes. I mean, anyone who doubts the physiological addiction part of kratom can just go on Quitting Kratom on Reddit and see. I mean, people have to go to rehab for this. It's very, the withdrawal is horrible. So maybe we can flash forward, because I don't think, I just wanted to talk about the beginnings of it.
Yeah.
But I think the real horrible, I mean, it got very, very, very bad after we got divorced. And I started using it.
There were touches, like there were, I mean, obviously like with COVID, time was a flat circle at that point, but there were, like, I remember these weird, just kind of like brush strokes of memory, like us sitting on the grass of that church watching fireworks, and you talking about like, I really need to quit this shit. That was the first time I was like, oh shit, like this is way more addictive than I thought it was. And at that point, like, I never really had a problem, but I think that's because I was using it recreationally at that point. And we'll talk about the other point where I recognized that it could be a problem, because it definitely was for me.
The kratom?
Yeah, absolutely. I recognized that it was very sneaky when it came to how it gets you addicted. So I think that it was hard. You were in a,
while we were married.
Well, yeah, during that point, but at that point you had never even touched a kratom kava shot, and I think that was the harbinger of your true addiction.
Yeah, I mean, that was a game changer for me. Although the kratom, I mean, I couldn't. I used it when we were married. We got divorced, and then I started using it a lot more, and I got into a new relationship very quickly, and I started using it very, very much in that relationship. I don't want anyone to think that I wasn't addicted to the kratom. I mean, it was definitely a monster, but for me, the true beast was the kava kratom extract shot.
Yeah.
I mean, it destroyed my life. So we get divorced. What did your kratom journey look like from there?
So I used it occasionally. I remember, when I rented the house, and like after I'd moved on, and I remember using it maybe like once every like 2 or 3 months. I'd be like, oh yeah, you know what? Like I want to kick back. I really don't drink alcohol, and I can probably count on one hand how many times I've had a truly good experience with marijuana. So it was one of those things that, like, I knew I wasn't going to have an anxiety attack. I wasn't going to have a panic attack like I do with weed. I don't drink alcohol that much. So I was like, this is a good outlet for me to kind of just let loose. And so I would use it like that. And then I remember Christine coming to me and being like, hey, I found these kratom kava shots. They're really good.
That's interesting that you remember that, because I can't remember. I've tried to remember when they first entered my life. Do you remember when that was?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't say anything negative about them when I introduced them to you?
No. As a matter of fact, I remember us, because this was right at the onset of them starting to come out with one particular brand. And let me try to think when this was. So this was after I stayed in that house for a little bit. I moved back in with my parents, and it was around that time. So I would say,
so it was a long time ago. It was pretty early on in my addiction.
November of 22. So almost a year after we had separated.
Okay, just for listeners, November of 22, and I got clean this last time in May of 24. So almost a year and a half of using that stuff. I didn't even realize I used it that much.
Yep.
So after I recommended it to you, I didn't know I did that. Did you go out and try it?
Almost immediately. I found a place that was close enough to go. I didn't have to drive like an exorbitant amount to go get it. Got one, tried it.
Did you drink the whole thing?
Yeah. Like just, one. And that was the thing too. I noticed that, when that particular brand first came out,
those little blue bottles,
the little blue bottles, it always said that the suggested serving size was a half dose. But as it grew and as its popularity grew, you would see the marketing and the branding start to grow with it as well. And I remember specifically coming across a gas station and it had this giant sign that said like half bottle if you want energy, full bottle if you want to relax.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And I was like, and at this point, Christine was deep in her addiction, and I had already.
At the point when you saw that
yes,
sign.
I had already grown like an intense hatred for that shit. And it got to the point where every gas station I would go into, they would have it. I would remark to the gas station attendant, I'd point to him, like, do you know what that is? And they're like, no. And I was like, is it popular? And they're like, yeah, it's incredibly popular.
I ask that all the time. I can't
keep it in the shelves. And I'm like, that shit is poison.
Yeah, I still vape. And every time I make sure I only have, I have more than 4 months off of that stuff, but I never go in. I don't like going into vape stores by myself because obviously they sell the little blue bottles almost everywhere. But I always ask if it's popular. And I mean, the answer is always, oh, yes. Like we can't keep this stuff on the shelves. It's a resounding
yes.
Yeah. So you tried it and did you like it the first time you tried it?
I mean, it does exactly what it intends to do. I mean, it makes you feel euphoric.
It draws you in. Yeah.
And so I started to search for other places to have it. And in doing that, I found that the website had where to buy zip code. And there was a little language in there that says, if there is a store, they say we have it and they don't, then we'll give you an entire case for free.
I remember that.
Yes. And so I drove to this place. They didn't have it. And I was like, it can't be.
I think they have since removed,
they definitely have.
Yes,
yeah.
Said offer from the website.
They didn't have it. So I emailed them and I said, hey, this store didn't have it. Is it possible to get that case? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. What's your address? And I would say within a week, I had, however, I think 12 bottles. 12 bottles a case.
12 bottles.
And I kept I'd say almost half. I gave Christine half.
I don't even remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I don't remember a lot from that time because I was a mess.
And even that was still in like the incubation stage of your true addiction with that stuff.
When you gave me half the case, did you think I was addicted to it? Did you know I had a problem with it? Or maybe, I don't know. I tried to hide it from
that was the thing.
Almost everyone.
When I came to Kratom, by the time we ended our relationship, I didn't think that you were addicted to it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that it was one of those things that you kind of kicked and, you reformulated. And I think that was probably due in large part to that, I attributed your anxiety or depression to our relationship. And then when you found your boyfriend and, at first glance, you would think everything's good, but really it wasn't. And I think those things allowed me to be like, oh, okay, well, she's good now. And we started to, our relationship started to mend, and we were just trying to be friends at that time. I don't think we were ready to be friends at that time. I think a lot of shit had to happen first.
And just for all the listeners, I mean, all this time I very much was addicted. I mean, there were times, there were so many times when I would try to stop on my own or to limit my use I tried everything in the book, but I just couldn't get off of it. And I was also very much trying to hide it from almost everybody in my life. I mean, everybody in my life, because the addiction was so deep. I knew that if people found out and became concerned, there was a chance I'd have to give it up.
Yeah.
So, the addiction secrets keep us sick is a big thing in the AA and NA rooms. Mm-hmm. And my secrets were absolutely keeping me very sick.
And if you think of addiction like a slippery slope downwards, yours was not a slope. It was like you were standing on a trapdoor and the trapdoor was just ripped out. And I mean, you dove headlong into it, because from November to January is when all of 2023 is when I started hey, you know what? My my check didn't go. I'm getting my check late. Can I borrow $20? And
I would say that.
yeah,
Yes.
for the most part, you did a good job of paying me back. Which again, that just kind of lessens your concern or suspicion that something's wrong. And I remember in January of 2023, I got a new job and we had to go to an on-site, so I had to fly out of state. And I remember it was at the tail end. And I remember you asking me for money, and I was in a Vans store. I was trying on shoes. And I remember that being like, something's up. You should not be asking me for money this much. Because like from November to January, that's how quickly the frequency started.
Mm-hmm.
Like the frequency just blew up. And so that's when I started to like really question what's going on. And, you know, I think that was when you first was like, yeah, you were like, I have a problem and I need to get it. I need to fix it.
Did I come to you and I told you that?
I think I confronted you about it, and you were like, yeah, I need to stop, and I'm going to. But you know,
and I wanted to. I mean, I think that's the thing a lot of people don't understand about addiction. Yeah. A very large part of me desperately wanted to quit. I mean, the true me very much wanted to quit, and I tried a lot of times on my own, but I just kept, I couldn't do it alone. I think there's a very common misconception about addicts, and I know Sean doesn't think this, but that they're weak or that they, just like getting high. And no, at the end of my addiction, I hated every minute of it, but it's an addiction. I mean, it's a monster. It just has this horrible hold on you that is, just so hard to describe. So I think around January is when I went to my parents. And I was living with my parents at the time. And I asked them if they would help me taper.
I feel like that was closer to April.
Oh.
We went to that water park and you were tapering then. Mm-hmm. And that was the thing too, is that between January and April, like I could just see the light dying inside of her. And she became a shell of who she was. And when April came, because that was when we started, I hadn't really inserted myself. This is
April of 2023. Yeah. Just for reference, I went to rehab for this stuff in July of 2023.
Yeah. I hadn't really inserted myself into the family dynamic of like bringing her parents in. She did that on her own volition. And for a while, I saw the light start to come back. When we went to the water park, that was the first time. And I even remember telling her in the parking lot, like, you sound like yourself again. And I was like, this is great. We're good. We're over it. And I think that too just shows you like how fucking addictive this stuff is. And, I'm not trying to compare it to heroin or something like that, like something real strong, but like in a way it's almost worse than heroin because it's so pervasive and it's so readily available and there's no stigma and you don't have to go to sketchy places to get it. And all of these things, despite it may not be as addictive as heroin, but all of those things compounding upon one another make it pretty close to, or addictive in a different way. April was great. And then
on my side, April was not so great. I mean, because I was trying to taper with the help of my parents. My mom would hold on to the kratom for me, and we came up with a taper plan. My parents and they were very supportive and are still very supportive. I was following the taper for a while, but then I started just finding ways. I mean, my parents were also, I should say, monitoring my bank account. Mm-hmm. They were tracking my car. I mean, everyone was trying very, very hard to help. And I just got sneakier. I mean, not at first. I really did try, but I just got sneakier.
Your addiction.
My addiction got sneakier.
You did not get sneakier.
Right. And that's an interesting point. So you said I became a shell of myself. At my best, how would you describe me? like pre-addiction or, like now without the addiction.
Well, what was it? Sparkles?
Mm-hmm.
Was that it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're bubbly. You're an introvert, but you hold yourself well amongst extroverts. You joke around. You like music. You have a personality.
Yeah.
Like you had none of that. You were a walking zombie.
Yeah. All of that went away.
It was gone. Everything. Yeah.
Yep.
And
it steals everything.
We weren't even at the point where we could, like, at a certain point, I knew exactly if you were on it, if you weren't, if you were using. At that point, we didn't. And I think that just shows again too that, like, addiction to this shit is multifaceted and it's dynamic, and it's like a fucking Pokemon. It just evolves. And I think we were at the Charmander stage. We hadn't reached Charizard yet. We were getting there. We're about to. The asking for money started back up. I'm pretty sure at this point, were you still at the library?
Mm-hmm. I hadn't been fired yet.
Yeah, I mean, it just got bad. And I remember you started to have, like, physiological symptoms,
like
and
what?
Evidence.
I'm very curious.
Your skin.
Yes.
Your skin was just, you were sallow, and you almost looked like a wax version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Your eyes, you could just see it. Your eyes were dead.
And I kept getting eye infections. I mean, it just started destroying my body.
Yeah. And then, I mean, that was around the time when things started to really pick up, and, like, your boyfriend started to reach out and be like, she's
to
just,
you.
Yeah, she's
Mm-hmm.
just like, she's passing out. And, at that point, I had already had the conversation with her that was like, look, you may not be lying to him, but you're lying by omission, and you've predicated this entire relationship upon this lie by omission, and it's going to bite you in your ass. And,
yeah, at that point, I mean, I just felt like I had built this huge house of cards, and all of them were starting to shake, and everything was just about to collapse. I mean, I'd been using for that whole relationship secretly. I had a job that I loved, and I knew I was about to lose it because I wasn't performing up to any kind of standards. Everyone knew. I mean, we weren't talking about it very much, but everyone in my family knew, and they were texting each other.
I think that's another insidious part, is that I think that once you get in so much, I think not only you're addicted to the substance, but you're addicted to the finding it, the sneaking around. I think there's a thrill in there.
Absolutely. The whole process at the end was linked to the using of it. So I would literally start to feel the high, just thinking the first thought, oh, like, where am I going to find it today, would start a little high. I mean, it's insane.
Oh, trust me. Like, I mean, we haven't talked about that yet. And that this is about the time too, when I started to really have my eyes open. I didn't feel it in that way, like, but I definitely felt like, oh yeah, like this is nice, and I get to start my day. And I remember being in my first job. So this was even before that, because I work entirely from home. And I remember, like, being on my computer and being like, oh, I can, I have a little bit of time. I'm going to go out and pop out and buy one. And that's when I started to slowly realize, like, I woke up one day and I'm like, I'm taking one of these every single day. And I'm not addicted to it, but it's becoming a habit. And that's when I was like, I need to quit this shit for good. And so I stopped, because that kind of coincided with the time when, like, Christine's true downward spiral began with it.
You were like, oh shit, this stuff is dangerous.
And that's another thing too, is that, like, I also felt like this need, like, if she's addicted to this, I don't want to be using this, not only because I don't want to get addicted, but, like, if I'm trying to get her to get off of this stuff, it would be disingenuous for me to continue using it. And also, I think that there was some sort of, like, subconscious need to be supportive in hopes that you'd see that. But I mean, And at that point, you don't see anything but the next bottle.
Right. I didn't see or care about anything other than those blue bottles at the end. Unfortunately, to all who are listening, rehab wasn't a happy ending for me. I mean, the year after was pretty bad. What led to rehab? Maybe don't go into too many details, but how could you tell that because I'll tell you, listeners, I know what led to rehab, and I did some very, very, very unspeakably shitty things to Sean. I can't believe, thinking back on that, and I've said this many times, that he still talks to me, but in kind of just in a more general way, what led to rehab? I lost my job.
You lost your job.
My boyfriend broke up with me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was just like kind of poetic justice or poetic irony, but it all collapsed at once.
All at once.
Literally at once. I was in Las Vegas with my son. I took him down there to do this like immersive art thing. And I remember we'll just call it the catalyzing event. I was made aware of it while I was down there. And at that point, I also got a call from her boyfriend saying, like, I think she needs to go to the emergency room. Like, she's blacked out. She's passing out. Her heart rate is all over the place. Her blood pressure is pretty much non-existent. And still at that point, like, I could not say anything because, she had begged me not to. And also, like, that's a very tenuous situation for an ex-husband to be communicating stuff like that to a boyfriend, like, hey, your girlfriend is addicted. I mean, it can be taken in so many different ways.
Right.
It could be taken as truth. It could be taken as me just being incendiary. It could be taken as me trying to manipulate or ruin her life. So a bunch of different reasons led me to not, shine light upon it and, just trust that it's going to eventually come out. And that's what it did. Like, everybody in her family didn't talk about it with him. And I think
who?
Your boyfriend.
With my ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, ex-boyfriend. And I think that he was definitely ignorant to the situation. He had no idea what kratom was. I remember being in the bathroom at Las Vegas. Our son was sleeping and talking to him, and him saying, like, either she goes with me or she's going in an ambulance. And he went to the hospital, and that was a whole situation. And that's when I finally was like, yeah, man, she's addicted to this shit, kratom, specifically kratom and kava shots. Mm-hmm. And he recognized, like, oh yeah, that's, I noticed that's where, I've seen those things around.
Yeah, he would find the lids to them in my car. I mean, the bottles were scattered all over his neighborhood because I would just toss them out the window of my car to, like, hide them.
So a couple of days after that, when I, down in Las Vegas, when the catalyzing event happened, I first went to her parents and was like, look, this happened. We have two options here. And I'd been begging her to go to rehab.
The catalyzing event was something that Sean could have pressed legal charges against me for. Yeah. It was very serious. So yeah, go ahead, Sean. You went to my parents.
Yeah, I'd been begging her at that point to go to rehab. I was like, you need to go to rehab. And she's like, I know, I just don't want to. He'll find out. Yeah.
At the time, I knew my boyfriend would break up with me. That sounds like such a petty thing.
You were addicted.
But I was addicted. I mean, I think a large part of me just was very scared to stop using. I mean, how could I find a way to be happy? This stuff had been, it's so sick because it had not made me happy for years, but my mind told me this stuff is the only thing that makes me happy. Meanwhile, it was making me miserable and it was literally killing me. Yeah. But yeah, there was an intervention. Sean, I remember very clearly the call. Sean called me and confronted me about what I had done.
As your boyfriend was confronting you?
Yes, as my boyfriend was confronting me about things I had done to him. I had lost my job.
He did not handle it very well.
And Sean said, listen, he said, I'm pressing charges. And I can't remember if I proposed it or at some point, Sean said, the only way I'll even consider, you didn't say you were not going to press charges, but you said the only way I would even consider not pressing charges is if you go to rehab. Yep. And for that, I just everything happened at once and I was relieved. I felt really horrible and like so much bad stuff had happened. But my boyfriend broke up with me. I was being forced to go to rehab and I was relieved. I felt such relief. I was scared. I was very depressed. I wasn't happy at all. But a very large part of me was like, thank God.
Yeah.
And I remember I went home after I had already decided to go to rehab, and there was an intervention set up and everyone was just kind of there to make sure I was going to go to rehab. All my brothers and my parents. Were you there, Sean?
I don't think I was there.
But that's when I decided to go to rehab. Unfortunately, if you've listened to my episode of the podcast, I did not stay sober after rehab. I really wanted to. I loved rehab. If you're struggling with kratom, it helped very much to go to rehab, especially going through detox and having a medically assisted detox, which I needed. And the withdrawal was still awful, but I got through it. You know, it's going to be awful. Embrace the suck if you're thinking about doing it. And then I was free of it. Unfortunately, I didn't have my mental shit in order. I didn't work any kind of recovery program when I got out of rehab. And I started drinking pretty heavily after rehab as a replacement for the kratom. And then the drinking opened the door to the kratom. So I used for a lot of the next year after rehab. But I did get clean in May. So we don't have a lot of time left, Sean. But I mean, I would say this past year has just been, I mean, besides the last 4 months, the year after rehab was even worse. Sean did he didn't do anything legally. I mean, you know, on like legal,
we had
legal documents.
We had no legal custody arrangement, but you know, it got worse and worse and worse, even worse than it was before she went to rehab. And
because I mean, at this point, folks, I mean, I wasn't even messing with the kratom powder or capsules anymore. No. It was just the blue bottles, and I was using at the end up to 16 a day. So it was insanity.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Sean, at some point did take, and I've been pretty open about this. But
March 6th.
Yep.
We had an intervention. Your parents called me. At that point, you know, we had all been working together. I think that catalyzing event and everything that transpired, it made us realize that we were working as a team, but it was like two different teams working without any communication about the same objective. But at that point, we began to work together and remain in constant contact. And
my addiction was so mad about that. I won't say I was, because I'm very grateful now. No. But at the time, my addiction was so angry because it saw that united front as a
threat.
A threat.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and I still remember, like, there were examples, you know, the true downfall started in September. And, you know, you were already dating somebody again.
I jumped into a relationship
which I had
very quickly after rehab.
Yeah. You were supposed to...
He could do his own. We're still together. We broke up like 5 times this past year because of my addiction. But he could do his own episode because he saw a lot of it as well. Yeah.
Our first interaction was over the phone. I never even met him.
Yeah, your first interaction with my boyfriend was over the phone.
Yeah. And I mean, it was kind of like positive because I realized that, like, okay, she's with somebody now that at least I can not necessarily trust, but like I had a good vibe. And because, you know, I was trying to call her and she just wasn't answering, and he called me himself and was like, hey,
from my phone,
from your phone. He was like, hey, I saw you keep calling and I didn't want you to worry. Damn, pretty stand-up guy there. But again, speaking to her, like the anger of her addiction, you know. Oh,
I was so angry. Anytime anyone threatened my use or expressed concern over my use, because it made me feel, the real me feel very guilty and ashamed. And
you would lash out.
I would lash out. Yeah.
So it got bad. And then in January
of this
year, I met with her. And I said, look, we need to talk. Because that was when I was like, I was thinking about our son and his safety. And so I called her and I was like, look, you need to meet me somewhere. And so we met in the car and I recorded the entire conversation. And I was like, look, I don't want to do this, but you brought me there. And I'm going to have to go for full custody. And mind you, this is in January. So there's still another 3 months. And at that point, rather than going for full custody, you know, like she begged me not to, and that she would do anything. You know, it's the standard, you know, addiction talk. And I wrote up a list of things that I would need in order for me to not go for it. I met with her and her parents. So
I signed it.
She signed it.
Yep.
And at that point, we would know instantly if she was on it. And it just didn't get any better. Now we're at March, and March 6th was, I think, really that was your rock bottom. And maybe it was the start of your rock bottom.
It was the start of my rock bottom.
Your rock bottom was nebulous.
Mm-hmm.
Her parents called and were like, hey, we want to have an intervention. Can you be here? And I was like, yeah. So it was her day with our son, and they took him to her brother's place. She arrived before I got there. And as soon as I opened the door, like, I did not see her. Like, I was looking straight at her. I did not see her.
Mm-hmm.
It was like seeing somebody wholly possessed. And I think that her addiction knew at that point that things were different.
It was in trouble.
Yeah, it was in trouble. And, you know, the vitriol that was thrown from her towards her parents, and then the frustration that was thrown back at her from her parents.
It was an awful, it was an awful scene.
And, you know, at a certain point, she called our son down, and essentially he witnessed some things.
A little bit. Yeah, he witnessed some of
the furor. And that was when I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm done. Like, this was the final straw. I had a lot of patience, but I could not stand for that. And
now I'm so grateful you took custody of him until I could get my shit together.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it took me a while. You know, in my episode, I say that, I lost another job. I crashed my car.
You had visitation. And
I was able to visit my son, but then I lost it because I was using when I would go to visit. But I'm very grateful. I've told you this, that he had you through all that time. And unfortunately, I mean, it took a lot of people putting up at the time, these boundaries that seemed very harsh to me. But thank goodness they were put in place, because I think I would still be using today if people didn't put up the boundaries they did. You took our son for a couple months,
and like completely incommunicado. Like, you weren't even. I
couldn't even talk to him. My parents finally said they were going to evict me, and they were illegally writing up papers to do so. I said I lost my job. My boyfriend broke up with me for what seemed like a very final time. He cut off communication with me and with people involved with me.
Yeah, because I was communicating with him pretty much every day at that point. You know,
you and him were talking, and he was so hopeful that I was off of it. That part makes me so sad, because I was not, and he was very hopeful I was. And I wasn't. And when he realized that, he broke up with me. So everything again was taken away. But this time I saw very clearly that I was about to lose my son. I was about to lose my home, my family. And I had lost someone who I, was really in love with. And I was like, I'm going to die. The next thing I lose is my life.
Yep.
And I very clearly saw that I was going to die. And so thank goodness. I mean, I finally started going to meetings. I did cold turkey.
Well, I think too that I think it's prudent to talk about that part. Like, that last day that you came to my house, it was the last day that you had any communication with him. You showed up high. Mm-hmm. I could tell. I called you on it. Mm-hmm. You slept over that night, and I don't know if you know, but I took my keys with me. Mm-hmm. I took my wallet with me, because I knew if I left my keys where they go, she knows where I put them. She's going to go out and buy. And
this is a very real episode, everyone. And this is kind of hard for me to talk about.
I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, the changes that have been made over the last 5 months.
2 weeks ago, I literally told you, I said, this is the best our relationship has been ever.
Yeah.
And we were together for 14 years and married for 10 of them. And that very last day is when you brought up vacation. And you're like, are you excited for vacation, my son? And his very first question was, can daddy come? And she was like, yeah, I don't see why he couldn't. I had a really good I still have a great relationship with her parents. I consider them more parents than my parents. And at a certain point, once I took it, I was like, look, it's either we go to vacation?
Because the vacation was with my family.
Yeah.
So it was originally going to be my family and me and my son. But by the, towards the end, my son didn't feel safe being alone with me. And he did feel very safe with Sean. And so he asked if Sean could come on the vacation. So I got sober on May 25th of this year.
That was your rope.
The vacation was, I think it started like June 22nd or something.
Yeah.
And so my family and Sean was still hesitant and he didn't commit to anything at the beginning, but everyone kind of laid it out that if I could get a month of sobriety under my belt for real, like hard earned sobriety.
Yes.
I'm talking like recovery,
Yeah.
going to meetings. And that's what worked for me. The AA meetings worked for me very well. But if I could get a month of good recovery under my belt, I would be allowed to go on the vacation with my family and my son, who I hadn't seen at this point in a couple months.
Yeah.
Sean would still go, and he did go. But that was a huge motivator for me, was the fact that I would get to spend a week with my son, who I hadn't seen in months at this point, if I was able to stay sober. And I clung to that in my darkest moments. And I would also get to spend a week with my family, who would get to see a sober me.
Yep.
I just want to say that Sean, on that week of vacation, was just incredible. I mean, it was my family, our son and Sean went to AA meetings with me that week. I don't drink anymore either. And he didn't drink that week out of solidarity. And then he and my son, to celebrate my 30 days sober, bought me a present and a cake when I was down there. So Sean's been just so supportive. I challenge you to find a divorced couple that is, more connected and just, I don't know. He's just been incredible this whole time. And I am so grateful that our son had you during the time that I was really struggling. Thank goodness.
Yeah. But I mean, I knew like that was the thing, like the through line again. And I told you this probably 100 times during this, was to like, look, you may not see it. My son's safety and everything, like that's paramount. But like every choice I make, I'm making in your best interest. And I'm trying desperately to get you to see that.
And I did see it when I got sober.
Yeah.
It was very clear to me. It's funny how things are muddied when you're in your active addiction. I thought everyone was against me and just thought I was this disgusting person. And I was just so angry at everybody. Yeah. But then
I never thought you were a disgusting person. I thought the addiction was disgusting, and I've always displaced the two.
Yeah. But then that's one of the gifts of recovery to me, is gratitude and clarity and being able to look back and see, oh my goodness, all of these people love me so much and they were fighting for me so hard. And I'm just very grateful for that.
Yeah. And you deserve, and that was the thing. Like, I wanted you to be happy, and you deserve to be happy. That vacation will go down as probably the best vacation I may ever experience, because like you were alive again. And like sharing AA meetings with you was beautiful.
You loved AA meetings.
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the sense of community, and you guys are like a lamplight against the darkness that you're all experiencing.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
It is. And you're sober, and you're communicative, and your personality is back, and we share music with one another. We joke around. We haven't fought.
Nothing was fake. I mean, that's how vacation felt. It just felt like everything was genuine and real. Not easy. I mean, I wouldn't ever say sobriety is easy. I mean, Sean knows I've had some very challenging days, but I think one of the important things is that I'm a lot more honest now.
Yeah.
I'm able to come to Sean when I'm struggling, and I always feel like he's just supportive and just wants me to succeed in my recovery for my sake and for our son's sake.
I mean, I think you should talk about when you were supposed to drive me. I think that's a watershed moment.
Yeah. Just really, we don't have a lot of time, but there was a moment in my sobriety. I had been sober for
a couple months.
I'd been going to AA meetings every day, working a program. I think at that point I had a sponsor, and Sean was starting to seriously give me custody of our son back. And on this particular day, it was the first day where I was going to spend a whole day with my son. And I didn't have my car at the time because I had crashed it during my use of substances. So Sean was going to let me borrow his car. And I woke up that day and a little plan had hatched in my head about how I was going to use Sean's car to go buy the blue bottles. This was with about 2 months of sobriety under my belt. And I can recognize now that I started that plan because I was stressed about, having my son for the whole day. I was nervous. I was scared. It was scary. But the plan started, and the plan went pretty far. I mean, I had a very developed plan in my head about how I was going to get these things. And I was ready to do it. And then Sean arrived at my house about to drop off his car for me to use for the day. And
Like
because I darted out of the house and I forced myself, it was one of the hardest things I've done. And maybe fellow addicts in recovery can understand, but it was so hard to tell on my addiction. But I was crying, I think, almost. And I said, Sean, do not let me take your car today. I have a plan to go buy the blue bottles. And if you give me your car, I'm going to do it.
I have to tell on myself.
And I have to tell on myself. And and I told on myself because I had been going to meetings every day and I knew that secrets keep you sick. And it was very hard. I mean, the addiction was in there and it wanted those blue bottles, and I started crying. I cried for about an hour afterwards because I knew I wouldn't be able to use. But I did it. I told Sean, I asked my parents to drug test me. I asked my boyfriend to drug test me at the end of the day just to make sure I hadn't used. And after I told on myself and grieved not being able to use that day, and that sounds sick, but like it is sick. I mean, it's a sickness. After I did that, I felt so much better and I got through the day without another thought of using.
Yep.
That was a huge moment for me. And I think
probably
for Sean,
the biggest. I feel like I don't know a lot about addiction, but I feel like that first time you're met with kind of a fork in the road, the first big urge, and you're met with a fork in the road where you can succumb to it or you can surmount it. And I think that has to be one of, if not the hardest thing that you're going to do.
And I'm so grateful I had tools and I was armed to handle a situation like that, because I promise you, if I was alone and unarmed, I would have used and succumbed. So that's one of my biggest recommendations to anyone listening. And we'll have to wrap this up because we've been talking for an hour, Sean. For anyone listening, don't do this alone. If you can, have people around you supporting you, and you can, then why do it alone? This battle is a hard one, and it's scary, and it's very lonely. Addiction can be so isolating. There are so many people who know and can relate to what you're going through. Very specifically, check out, if you haven't, the Kratom specific meetings for addiction and recovery. There are Facebook groups. There's the Quitting Kratom subreddit. There are people out there. There are AA meetings, smart recovery meetings, so many programs of recovery so that you're not alone, and you are not. There's so many people, unfortunately, battling with this substance. And I'm here, and Sean's in your corner. He was in mine. I'm sure he's in yours.
Yep.
Are there any final words, Sean, before we wrap this up? We could talk for a long time.
Yeah.
But
this could have been a tome.
This was very therapeutic.
Yeah. I told you it would be. I said this would be catharsis. I think that, just touching upon what she said, I think that addiction is lonely because the addiction wants you to be alone. Because if you're with somebody else, you're not with the addiction. So if an ex-husband with a very tumultuous relationship can be a source of support, there's somebody out there. And even if they're a perfect stranger, there are people out there that specifically want to help you. I want to help you. Yeah. For sure, because I know how horrible it can get. And I'm here to help. There are so many others that will help. And if a total stranger came to me and was like, I need to talk to somebody, I need help, I would help them.
Yeah, go to Sean.
Yeah.
We'll just give you Sean's
There you
personal
go.
contact
Yeah.
info. Everyone can
Throw
just
my
go to
email
him.
in it. Yeah.
Well, Sean, thanks for talking with me.
Yep, absolutely.
Our son's in the other room, so we're going to go check on him, wrap up this interview. That's it for today. Thanks for listening, everybody.